Here's something to think about. Why does life feel so much harder than it should be? Have you ever had one of those days where nothing catastrophic happens, but everything just feels heavy? You wake up already exhausted, dreading the day before it even begins. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and suddenly it feels personal, like the universe is out to get you. A small comment from a coworker lingers in your head for hours, replaying on a loop. You can't focus, can't relax, and by the time you finally get to bed, you're scrolling mindlessly on your phone, trying to distract yourself from this uneasy feeling that won't go away. And the worst part, nothing really happened. There was no disaster, no major crisis, just this invisible weight pressing down on you, making everything feel more difficult than it needs to be. We all experience it, but have you ever stopped to ask yourself, where does that weight come from? Because here's the truth. Most of the struggle we go through, it's self-inflicted, not consciously, not on purpose, but in small ways every single day. It's in the way we overthink, the way we resist reality instead of accepting it, the way we latch onto every little inconvenience and let it dictate our mood. It's in the stories we tell ourselves about what life should be like, how people should treat us, and what we deserve. And when reality doesn't match those expectations, we suffer. Not because of what's happening, but because of what we believe about what's happening. Take a moment and think about the last time you got really frustrated. Maybe someone was late to meet you. Maybe you worked hard on something and no one noticed. Maybe you had a plan and life just didn't cooperate. Whatever it was, zoom out for a second. What actually caused the frustration? Was it the event itself? Or was it the expectation you had that things would go differently? This is one of the hardest truths to accept, but it's also one of the most freeing. Life isn't hard because of what happens to us. It's hard because of how we respond. And if that's true, if our reaction is what creates the struggle, then we have more control over our happiness than we think. That's where Stoicism comes in. Now, before you start picturing old philosophers in togas, let's break it down. Stoicism isn't about being emotionless, and it's not about passively accepting everything that happens. It's about recognizing that most of the suffering we experience is optional. It's about training your mind to focus on what you can control and let go of what you can't. And once you start applying it, life suddenly gets a whole lot easier. Not because the world changes, but because you do. But here's the problem. Most of us don't live this way. We don't approach life with a stoic mindset. Instead, we fight reality. We hold on to grudges, replay past mistakes, and let things outside of our control dictate our emotions. We set expectations that aren't based on reality, but on our own desires. And then we suffer when reality doesn't conform. We make assumptions about what people meant when they said something, instead of just taking things at face value. And we spend an incredible amount of time and energy worrying about things that haven't happened, about things that might never happen, about things that already happened, but can't be changed. Think about how much lighter life would feel if you stopped doing that. Imagine if, instead of stressing about what someone else thinks of you, you just focused on what you think of you. Imagine if, instead of reacting emotionally to every inconvenience, you paused and asked, "Is this worth my peace?" Imagine if you trained yourself to see challenges not as personal attacks, but as opportunities to practice patience, resilience, and control. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. We're wired to react. We're wired to take things personally. We're wired to seek comfort and certainty. And when we don't get them, we resist. But resistance is exhausting. It drains your energy. It makes every minor inconvenience feel like a catastrophe. And it keeps you stuck in a constant loop of frustration, disappointment, and stress. So how do we break that cycle? How do we stop making life harder than it needs to be? That's exactly what we're going to explore. Because the truth is, life is already unpredictable. It's already full of challenges and setbacks. But suffering, that's optional. And once you understand that, once you see how much power you actually have over your own experience, everything changes. By the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of why we make life harder than it needs to be, and more importantly, what to do about it. We'll talk about the root causes of unnecessary struggle, the Stoic principles that simplify life, the common ways we sabotage ourselves without even realizing it, and practical steps to break free from that cycle. Because this isn't just about philosophy, it's about application. It's about walking away from this conversation with real, tangible changes you can start making today. So if you've ever felt overwhelmed, if you've ever felt like no matter how hard you try, life keeps throwing obstacles in your way, stay with me. Because the answer isn't in fighting harder, it's in learning how to step back, reassess, and move through life in a way that's lighter, calmer, and ultimately more powerful. Let's get started. When we look around at our lives, it's easy to start wondering, why does it feel like we're constantly battling against something? Why does it sometimes feel like we're pushing up a hill that never seems to end, no matter how hard we try? The truth is, a lot of our struggles, the ones that feel the hardest to handle, aren't always the result of what's happening around us. In fact, many times, the real cause is what's happening within us. How we're choosing to respond, how we're viewing the world, and how we're letting our own thoughts and emotions control us. It's easy to blame external circumstances. After all, it feels better to think that something outside of us is causing our pain, right? If we could just change this one thing, if we could just get a new job, move to a different place, meet the right person, or have more money, then things would be easier, wouldn't they? But here's where it gets tricky. The root cause of most of our struggles isn't found in the things we think will solve them. It's not in the job, or the person, or the house. It's in the way we're looking at everything, the way we're interpreting the world, the way we're handling the things that are out of our control. Think about it. How often do we experience something that's frustrating or difficult, and immediately our minds go into overdrive? We start overanalyzing everything, questioning our choices, questioning how we got here, and, this is the kicker, imagining all the ways it could go even worse. And then, we wonder why we feel so drained, why we're so exhausted, why we're stuck in that cycle of struggle. The struggle, in many ways, is self-created. And I know at first glance that might sound a little harsh. But hear me out. There's a deep truth that once you recognize it, can free you from so much of the suffering that you might not even realize you're creating. Most of the pain we experience doesn't come from the events themselves, but from the stories we tell ourselves about those events. Think about the last time something didn't go as planned. Was it the event itself that was so unbearable, or was it your mind's reaction to it that caused the real discomfort? Let's say you're stuck in traffic. You've got an important meeting in an hour, and the last thing you need is a delay. Immediately you start thinking, I'm going to be late. They're going to think I'm unprofessional. This is going to ruin my whole day. You're spiraling, right? But here's the catch. The traffic isn't ruining your day. Your thoughts about the traffic are the thing doing all the damage. The truth is, traffic is just traffic. It's the thing that's happening, and while it's annoying, it doesn't have to carry all that emotional baggage. But we give it that power by how we react. We add layers of panic, judgment, and frustration onto something that's beyond our control, and that's where the struggle begins. I'll give you another example. Think back to a time when you had a conversation with someone and it didn't go well. Maybe they said something that hurt your feelings, or maybe you just felt misunderstood. Now imagine this. You leave the conversation, and instead of letting it go, you start replaying it in your mind. You analyze every word they said, wondering if they meant something deeper, or maybe trying to defend yourself in your own head. The more you think about it, the worse it feels. You're creating a story in your mind where this conversation is the most important thing in the world, when in reality, it was just a moment that passed. We get trapped in our own narratives, believing that our interpretations of things are more significant than the things themselves. And here's where it all connects. This is how we make life harder than it needs to be. It's not that the world is inherently cruel or unfair. It's that we're constantly adding layers of complexity to situations that don't need it. We create emotional struggles by focusing on things we can't control, by holding on to our interpretations of things instead of accepting things as they are. We fight against the flow of life instead of just going with it, learning how to move through things without all the internal resistance. Now, if you've been listening closely, you might be starting to see the connection between all of this and the ancient wisdom of Stoicism. You're probably wondering, okay, so how does this tie into Stoic philosophy? Well, here's where it gets really powerful. Stoicism teaches us that there are two kinds of things in the world: the things we can control and the things we can't. And the secret to living with less struggle, less frustration, and less unnecessary pain is learning the difference between the two. And more importantly, letting go of everything that's beyond our control. I know that sounds simple, but really think about it for a second. If you stop trying to control everything around you, if you stop resisting reality, if you just let go of all the things you can't change, suddenly the weight lifts. The traffic? It's not in your control. The conversation that didn't go as planned? You can't change it. What other people think of you? Not in your control. But what you can control, what you can always control, is how you respond. You can control your thoughts. You can control your actions. You can control the narrative you tell yourself. And once you realize that, the struggle starts to fade. That's the core of Stoic thought. It's about recognizing where your power lies. And it's not in trying to manipulate the world around you, not in trying to control every outcome, but in accepting what's beyond your control and choosing your response. It's about realizing that your peace doesn't depend on external circumstances. It depends on your ability to find peace within yourself. Think about the last time you encountered a frustrating situation. What would have happened if you just paused, taken a breath, and told yourself, I can't control this, but I can control how I react? What if you didn't try to force everything to be exactly the way you wanted it, but instead allowed things to unfold without all the mental turmoil? The truth is, we make life harder by resisting the way things are. We struggle when we think life should be different, when we think we should always have control, when we believe that if we just plan everything perfectly, things will always go the way we want. But life doesn't work like that. Life is unpredictable, and the more we try to control it, the harder we make it on ourselves. So here's a question for you. How much of your current struggle is self-inflicted? How many times have you fought against something that you couldn't change, only to make yourself miserable in the process? Think about how much of your energy is spent resisting things that are simply a part of life. Traffic, the weather, the opinions of others, the fact that sometimes, no matter how much you try, things don't go as planned. The truth is, if you can learn to accept things as they are, without resistance, you'll be amazed at how much easier life becomes. Now, I want you to think about your life right now. What's one area where you feel like you're struggling unnecessarily? Is it in your job, your relationships, your own inner world? Whatever it is, ask yourself, what would happen if I stopped fighting against it? What would happen if I accepted that this is how things are, and instead of resisting it, I focused on how I can respond, how I can move forward with grace and resilience? The moment you realize that you can choose your response, life suddenly becomes less of a battle and more of an opportunity to grow. And that's when the real transformation begins. We've talked a lot about why we make life harder than it needs to be. And if you've been following along, you might be starting to get a clearer picture of how much of the struggle in life comes from our own thoughts, reactions, and expectations. But there's a deeper layer to this, a way of seeing the world that not only helps us reduce unnecessary stress, but helps us actually embrace life in its full, unfiltered form. It's a way of living that Stoics have been teaching for thousands of years, and honestly, it's one of the most powerful mindsets you can adopt to make life simpler, easier, and more fulfilling. You've probably heard the term Stoicism before. It's often misunderstood as some cold, emotionless philosophy. A lot of people think it's about suppressing your feelings or accepting whatever comes your way with no emotion. But that's not it at all. Stoicism is about understanding what you can control and what you can't control, and learning to focus on the things that actually matter. It's about embracing life as it comes, both the good and the bad, and choosing your response instead of reacting emotionally or impulsively. It sounds simple, right? But it's not easy. We live in a world that's constantly pushing us to do more, to be more, to fight harder for everything we want. We're told that if we're not constantly striving for something, we're failing. We're taught that if we don't feel the stress and pressure, we're not trying hard enough. But when you live like that, it's easy to lose sight of what actually brings you peace. It's easy to get caught up in the constant hustle, the endless chase for approval, and the never-ending race to the top. And in the middle of all that, you forget that there's another way to live, one that doesn't require you to fight against the world every single day. Take a moment and think about this. How much of your life right now is spent chasing things that ultimately don't bring you peace? How much time do you spend trying to control situations or people that are beyond your reach? How many of your daily stresses come from the expectations you've set for yourself, for how you think things should be, instead of just accepting things as they are? Because that's the first principle of Stoicism, focusing on what's within your control and letting go of everything else. The Stoics were really clear about this. Marcus Aurelius, one of the most famous Stoic philosophers, wrote about how we waste so much of our energy trying to change things that aren't ours to change. He said, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." In other words, stop obsessing over how the world should behave, how other people should treat you, or how your circumstances should look. Instead, focus on what you can control, your own behavior, your own reactions, and the way you choose to approach life. This doesn't mean you don't care about anything. Quite the opposite, actually. It's about caring deeply, but caring about the things that actually matter. Your own growth, your own peace, and your own ability to navigate life with grace and resilience. Let's talk about an example that I think a lot of people can relate to: stress. It's something we all experience, but have you ever stopped to think about why you get stressed in the first place? It's not just because of external pressures, right? A lot of the time, it's because we're trying to control something we can't. We're trying to control how other people behave or how situations unfold, and when they don't go the way we want, we feel like we've lost control, and that's when the stress starts to build. Imagine this scenario. You've got a big project at work. You've planned everything out, you've done all the prep, and now you just need it to go smoothly. But of course, things don't go as planned. A colleague drops the ball, the deadline gets pushed back, and now you're scrambling to pick up the pieces. The natural reaction is to get frustrated. You start thinking, "I can't believe this is happening. I put so much work into this, and now I'm going to look bad." But if you take a step back, what part of that situation can you control? The colleague's mistake? The deadline change? Of course not. But what you can control is your response. You can choose to be calm, to focus on what needs to be done next, to keep your mind clear instead of getting lost in frustration. And the more you practice that, the more you realize that you don't have to fight against the world to succeed. You just have to focus on doing the best with what you've been given. Now, I know this sounds like a nice idea in theory, but it's hard in practice. Trust me, I've been there. It's easy to say, Just focus on what you can control. But it's a lot harder when you're in the middle of a stressful situation, feeling like everything is falling apart. So how do you actually do it? How do you start applying Stoicism to your life, especially when the pressure is on? The first step is recognizing that you're not the victim of your circumstances. A lot of the time, we feel like life is happening to us, like we have no say in what's going on. But the Stoic perspective is that you always have control over how you respond. You can't control the actions of others, but you can control your own actions, your own mindset, and your own emotions. Once you realize that, you stop feeling helpless. You stop getting sucked into the drama of life and start moving through challenges with more purpose. Here's another example. Let's say you're in a difficult relationship, whether it's with a friend, a family member, or a partner. You've tried everything you can think of to make it work, but no matter what you do, things never seem to improve. You feel like you're putting in all the effort, but you're not getting anything back. It's frustrating, right? But if you're stuck in the mindset of trying to change the other person, trying to make them behave differently, you're only going to make yourself miserable. The Stoic approach is simple. You can't control their behavior, but you can control your response. You can decide whether or not to let their actions affect your peace. You can decide to either accept them for who they are, or if necessary, create boundaries to protect your own well-being. Now, this doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become emotionless. Stoicism isn't about detaching yourself from everything. It's about not letting your emotions control you. It's about learning how to approach life with a clear mind, free from the unnecessary turmoil we often create for ourselves. And that's something you can practice every day. Think about the last time you felt stressed or frustrated. Ask yourself, how much of that stress was because of something outside of my control? And how much of it came from the way I was responding to the situation? If you can learn to make that distinction, you can start making the shift from reactive to proactive, from stress to calm, from powerless to empowered. And here's the thing. The more you practice Stoicism, the more you realize that life doesn't have to be a constant struggle. We make it harder than it needs to be because we get stuck in our own heads. We get lost in our own expectations, and we forget that we always have the power to choose how we respond. That's the key to simplifying life. It's not about eliminating challenges or making everything perfect. It's about learning how to navigate those challenges with grace, resilience, and a calm mind. So, what would it look like if you applied this to your life? If you started focusing only on the things you can control and let go of everything else? How would your stress levels change? How would your peace of mind improve? And most importantly, how would your relationships with others transform when you stopped trying to control them and instead focused on controlling your own actions and responses? That's the power of Stoicism. It's not a magic fix, and it's not about becoming perfect. It's about learning to live with intention, clarity, and a deep sense of peace, no matter what life throws your way. And when you do that, you'll find that life isn't as hard as it seems. You're in control of your thoughts, your reactions, and ultimately, your peace. So the next time you're facing a challenge, ask yourself, what can I control here? And then focus on that. The rest, let it go. Because when you do, you'll be amazed at how much easier life becomes. Have you ever stopped to consider how often we, as human beings, end up making life harder than it needs to be? I mean, we're all guilty of it at some point or another, right? We find ourselves in these struggles, stress at work, arguments with loved ones, frustrations about things outside of our control. And we think, why is life so difficult? But as you've probably already started to notice, there's something deeper at play here. It's not always about what's going on around us. It's about the way we're contributing to our own struggles, sometimes without even realizing it. I want you to think about your day today, or maybe yesterday. What happened that frustrated you? What was it that you couldn't seem to get past? Maybe it was something as small as a misunderstanding with a coworker, a project that didn't go as planned, or even just a moment where things felt like they were falling apart and you couldn't quite put them back together. It might seem like something external is at the root of your frustration. Maybe your colleague was rude, or maybe the world just isn't cooperating with your plans. But if we're being honest with ourselves, how much of that frustration comes from something we do to ourselves? Think about it. When something goes wrong, how often do we spiral into overthinking, replaying the event over and over in our heads? We think about what we could have said or done differently. We worry about what people think of us. We replay the situation as though it were some kind of movie, imagining all the ways it could have ended better. It's a natural thing to do, right? We all have that tendency. But what I want you to realize is that this tendency to rehash the past, to get caught in a loop of self-doubt, actually adds layers of difficulty to the situation. We make things harder on ourselves by not just letting it go. Take a moment and ask yourself, how many times have you turned a small problem into something much bigger than it had to be? How often do you hold on to a mistake or frustration, even when there's no need to? How many times do you let your mind make the problem bigger by worrying about things that have already happened, or things that might happen but haven't even occurred yet? I've been there, trust me. There have been times when I found myself stuck in a negative loop, feeling like my whole day was ruined by one little mistake or one comment that didn't go the way I wanted. I've gotten caught up in imagining worst-case scenarios, obsessing over things I can't change, and making myself feel worse instead of better. And the worst part? I did it to myself. It wasn't the event or the comment that was the problem. It was how I was choosing to react to it. And here's the thing. We all do this, often without realizing how much we're feeding into our own struggles. This is one of the ways we make life harder than it needs to be. We create unnecessary stress and frustration by holding on to things we can't change, by making a mountain out of a molehill, and by spiraling into thoughts that don't serve us. Think about it. How much time have you spent worrying about something that, in the end, wasn't even a big deal? We add so much weight to our own lives by trying to control things outside of our power. The moment we try to force everything to go the way we want, we set ourselves up for disappointment. Because here's the reality. We can't control the way others act, the way life unfolds, or how the world works. No matter how hard we try, we can't control everything. And yet, how often do we act like we can? How often do we spend our energy trying to make things go our way, only to end up exhausted and frustrated when they don't? Let's talk about the last time you felt really frustrated about something you couldn't control. Maybe it was a project at work that didn't go as planned, or an argument with a friend or family member that escalated for no good reason. We've all been there, right? You're trying your best, putting in the work, doing everything you can, and then, boom, things don't turn out the way you expected. And what happens next? It's not the situation itself that causes all the pain. It's the thoughts that follow. The thoughts that say, I can't believe this is happening to me. I've worked so hard and it's still not enough. This is unfair. This is a setback I don't deserve. And suddenly, that one little issue has grown into this huge weight that you can't seem to shake off. But here's the secret. Life isn't as hard as we make it. Life itself is just a series of events. It's how we react to those events that shapes our experience. If we constantly react with frustration, anger, or resentment, then yes, life will feel harder. But what if we changed how we reacted? What if, instead of immediately jumping into a spiral of self-doubt and frustration, we paused and asked ourselves, what can I control here? And what can I let go of? What if we stopped trying to control everything and instead focused on the things that are truly within our power, the way we think, the way we respond, the way we choose to move forward. Take the example of that project at work. Maybe you've done everything right. You've prepared, you've put in the hours, and yet it still doesn't go as planned. The natural response is frustration. But what if, instead of focusing on the fact that things didn't go as planned, you took a step back and focused on what you can do next? What if you realized that the frustration you feel is coming from trying to control something you can't? How others react, the outcome of the project, the timing of it all, and instead focused on what's within your control. Your response, your attitude, your next steps. It's like this. The world is always going to throw curveballs at us. There's no avoiding that. But we don't have to make it harder by getting caught up in the things we can't control. Life will never be perfect, and things will never always go the way we want. But we can learn to move through it with less resistance, less frustration, and less unnecessary struggle. We can stop trying to force life to bend to our will, and instead bend ourselves to life's flow. Think about this. How much time do you spend feeling stuck, trying to change things that can't be changed? How much energy do you waste getting upset over things that are out of your hands? What would it feel like to release that? To let go of the need to control everything and embrace life as it is. Imperfect, unpredictable, but still beautiful? I know it's not easy. Trust me. I've spent years trying to control the things I couldn't, and it only made my struggles harder. But once I realized that the real power lies in how we respond, that's when things started to change. I stopped wasting energy on things I couldn't change, and I started focusing on what I could. And you know what? Life didn't become perfect, but it did become a lot easier. I stopped feeling like I was fighting against the current, and instead, I learned to let it carry me. So what's the takeaway here? Life is challenging enough on its own without us adding extra layers of difficulty. When we focus on the things we can't control, whether it's the behavior of others, the way life unfolds, or the outcome of a situation, we only make things harder for ourselves. But when we shift our focus to what we can control, our thoughts, our actions, our responses, that's when the struggle begins to ease. That's when life starts to feel lighter. The next time you're faced with a challenge, I want you to ask yourself, what can I control here, and what can I let go of? And then, do just that. Let go of the things you can't change, and focus on what you can. You'll be amazed at how much simpler life becomes. Let's talk about something that we all want, but often struggle to achieve. Peace. Not just the kind of peace that comes from a quiet room or a weekend off, but real, internal peace. The kind of peace that stays with you, even when life is unpredictable, even when people disappoint you, even when things don't go your way. Because that's the goal, isn't it? To move through life with a sense of calm and clarity without being thrown off by every inconvenience, every misunderstanding, every challenge. But how do we actually get there? How do we train ourselves to stop making life harder than it needs to be and start living in a way that feels lighter, more intentional, and more in control? The answer isn't in some grand life overhaul. It's not about quitting your job, moving to the mountains, and meditating for hours a day. It's about small, everyday choices. It's about how you handle the little moments, because those are the ones that shape your overall experience. Think about your daily life. Think about the things that throw you off. Maybe it's the way your mornings feel rushed and chaotic before you even step out the door. Maybe it's how quickly you lose your patience when someone interrupts you, or how easy it is to let one bad moment ruin an entire day. None of these things feel huge in the moment, but they add up. They create the tone of your life. And if you don't have a system, if you don't have a way to manage these moments, then they start to manage you. So let's start small. Let's start with something you do every single morning. The moment you wake up, what's the first thing you do? Do you immediately grab your phone? check your notifications, scroll through social media. Start filling your mind with other people's problems, other people's opinions, other people's noise. Do you launch straight into stress mode, thinking about everything you have to do, all the things that could go wrong, all the reasons today is going to be exhausting before it even starts? If that's your default, then of course the rest of your day feels chaotic. You're starting it in reaction mode. You're not setting the tone. You're letting the world set it for you. Now imagine a different morning. Imagine waking up, and before you do anything else, you take a moment to just breathe. You don't reach for your phone. You don't immediately rush into planning mode. You just take a few deep breaths and remind yourself, I have control over how I show up today. I have control over my reactions, my thoughts, my mindset. That shift, just that tiny change, starts putting you back in the driver's seat of your own life. It reminds you that you're not just a passive player, rolling with whatever chaos the world throws at you. You're in control of you. And once you start your day with that mindset, it becomes easier to apply it throughout the day. Think about the last time something irritated you. Maybe someone cut you off in traffic. Maybe a coworker sent you an email that felt passive-aggressive. Maybe someone made a comment that just rubbed you the wrong way. Normally, your instinct might be to react, to get angry, to take it personally, to let it bother you for hours. But here's the thing. None of those things actually hurt you. They didn't physically harm you. They didn't take anything away from you. The only thing that made them feel so significant was your reaction to them. Now imagine if instead of reacting, you just observed. Imagine if, in that moment, you paused. Instead of immediately getting caught up in frustration, you asked yourself, does this actually matter? Is this worth my peace? And if the answer is no, you let it go. It sounds simple, but think about how much stress you could avoid just by practicing this one thing, pausing before reacting. It's the difference between letting your emotions control you and you controlling them. This is what the Stoics practiced. They believed that the only thing you truly own in this world is your mind, your thoughts, your reactions, your ability to choose how you respond to life. Everything else? Temporary, out of your control. And the more you focus on things you can't control, the more powerless you feel. But when you shift that focus back to what is in your hands, your mindset, your actions, your perspective, that's where real peace comes from. And I know, right now, some of you might be thinking, okay, but what about real problems? What about things I can't just let go of? And I hear you. There are moments in life that demand a response, things that require you to take action, to stand up for yourself, to deal with conflict. But even in those moments, you still have a choice. You still decide how you approach them. Are you coming from a place of clarity and purpose, or are you letting emotion drive the car? Because the way you handle small problems is often the way you handle big ones. If you let every little inconvenience send you into a spiral, then when something big happens, you're already primed to react with panic and stress. But if you train yourself, if you build the habit of pausing, of staying steady, of not letting small things shake you, then when big problems do come, you're ready for them. You handle them with the same calm, the same presence, the same focus. This is how you start applying Stoicism daily, not by reading philosophy books and nodding along, but by living it, by practicing control over your mind, over your emotions, over your reactions, day by day, moment by moment. And when you start doing that, something incredible happens. Life stops feeling so overwhelming. You stop feeling so reactive. You stop feeling like you're constantly at the mercy of circumstances. Because the truth is, you never were. You always had the power to decide how you respond. You just have to start using that power. So here's what I want you to take from this. You don't have to change everything overnight. You don't have to suddenly become this perfect, unshakable person who never gets frustrated or stressed. That's not the goal. The goal is to start noticing. Start catching yourself in those moments where you're about to react emotionally and just pause. Take a breath. Ask yourself if this is worth your peace. And if it's not, let it go. The more you do this, the easier it becomes, the more natural it feels. And over time, you'll realize that you're no longer controlled by every little thing that happens around you. You'll feel lighter, stronger, more in control. And that's where the real transformation begins. Not in trying to change the world around you, but in changing the way you move through it. Because once you learn to master your own mind, nothing, absolutely nothing, has the power to shake you. And that is true freedom. So here's your challenge. The next time something frustrates you, stop. Before you react, take one deep breath. Just one. And in that moment, remind yourself, I have control over this. I choose my reaction. I choose my peace. Try it. See how it feels. And if it works, if you notice even the slightest difference, keep doing it. Because small changes lead to big shifts. And before you know it, you won't just be thinking about Stoicism. You'll be living it. When things get tough, when life throws obstacles in your way, it's easy to feel like you're stuck. You feel like there's no way out, like everything's working against you. And no matter how hard you try, things just don't seem to go the way you want. We've all been there, right? Whether it's a challenging project at work, a personal setback, or something as simple as a disagreement with someone close to you, the pressure starts to build, and it feels like there's no good way to handle it. You might feel frustrated, powerless, or like you just can't keep up. But what if I told you that the way you respond to adversity can completely change how you experience it? That the way you face life's challenges doesn't have to be a constant battle, but instead, an opportunity for growth, a chance to test your strength, and even a way to find peace amid the chaos. Think about a time when you faced a real challenge. Maybe it was a time you felt knocked down, whether it was personal or professional, something that tested your limits. How did you react? Did you get angry? Did you feel overwhelmed by frustration or fear? Or did you step back, take a deep breath, and find a way to handle it calmly, with clarity, and with purpose? If you're like most people, the first reaction is usually emotional. We're wired that way, right? We react quickly, impulsively, without thinking too much. But here's the thing. Emotional reactions are often the exact thing that makes adversity feel even harder. The Stoics, the philosophers from ancient Greece and Rome, knew this. They didn't see life's challenges as things to be avoided or feared. Instead, they saw adversity as a tool for growth, something that could teach them, something that could sharpen them if they responded in the right way. They didn't deny that hardship was hard, that difficulty was difficult, but they understood that hardship in itself was not the real problem. It was their response to it that made all the difference. Think of it this way. You're in the middle of a storm. The wind is howling, the rain is pouring down, and it feels like it's just never going to end. Now imagine that storm is a metaphor for the tough times in your life. You can't control the storm itself. You can't stop the rain or make the wind die down. But you can control how you handle it. Do you huddle down, shivering and miserable, cursing the storm and wishing it would go away? Or do you stand tall, brace yourself, and weather the storm, knowing that it will eventually pass, that you have the strength to endure? That's what Stoicism teaches us. Life's storms are inevitable. We can't prevent them from happening. What we can do, though, is change how we respond to them. And that's where true strength lies, not in avoiding adversity, but in facing it with resilience, with control, and with a sense of inner peace. Because when you stop fighting against what's happening and instead focus on how you handle it, that's when the storm loses its power over you. Let's look at some real examples of how this plays out. Imagine you're facing a huge deadline at work. You're overwhelmed, feeling like there's too much to do and not enough time. Your instinct might be to panic, to feel frustrated that the pressure is mounting. But if you take a step back and apply some Stoic thinking, you might start to see things differently. First, you recognize that stressing out about the deadline won't make the clock move slower. You realize that worrying about what could go wrong won't change the outcome. And you acknowledge that while you can't control the time or the situation, you can control how you use your time, how you prioritize tasks, and how you choose to stay calm and focused. The stress doesn't go away immediately, but the way you approach the situation shifts. You become proactive, not reactive. Instead of letting the stress control you, you control your response. You're still facing the same storm, but now you're in control of how you navigate through it. It's the same in personal situations. Maybe you're dealing with a conflict in a relationship, a disagreement that's left you feeling hurt or misunderstood. Again, the instinct is to react emotionally, maybe even to lash out in frustration. But if you take a moment to reflect on the Stoic mindset, you can choose to approach the situation differently. Instead of reacting with anger, you ask yourself, what's in my control here? You realize that you can't change how the other person is acting, but you can control your reaction. You can choose to listen, to understand, to stay calm, and to respond in a way that is measured and thoughtful, rather than letting your emotions take the lead. The situation might not be perfect, but your response can be. The Stoics were all about practicing this kind of control. They didn't wait for the perfect moment to act. They didn't believe that waiting for things to align just right would somehow make life easier. They understood that life's challenges were part of the human experience. They knew that adversity wasn't something to run from, but something to face with a mindset of opportunity, because it was in those moments of difficulty that you could build your character, your resilience, and your inner strength. Take Marcus Aurelius, for example. As a Roman emperor, he had every reason to be stressed. His empire was vast, his leadership was constantly challenged, and the pressures of his position were enormous. But instead of succumbing to stress, he leaned into the Stoic principles. He wrote in his meditations that we should view obstacles as part of the plan, not something that derails us. He believed that every setback was an opportunity to practice virtue, to practice patience, to practice perseverance, and to grow stronger. And that mindset didn't just apply to the big challenges, it applied to the small ones too. Whether it was an angry person in the marketplace, a miscommunication with a friend, or an unexpected challenge on the battlefield, he approached it all with the same mindset. This is an opportunity to practice self-control, to practice resilience, to practice doing the right thing, no matter what. Now I know that might sound like a lot of pressure. We're not all emperors, right? We don't all face monumental challenges like he did. But the point isn't about the size of the challenge. It's about how you handle it. We all have our own battles, big or small. And the truth is, they're not going away anytime soon. Life will keep throwing curveballs. But how you respond to them, that is what will determine whether you thrive or struggle. That's what will determine whether you stay stuck in frustration or whether you move forward with strength. And that's the beauty of Stoic philosophy. It's not about avoiding adversity. It's about learning to face it with a different perspective, a perspective that empowers you. Because when you shift your mindset to see challenges as opportunities to grow, to practice your virtue, to strengthen your resilience, suddenly adversity doesn't seem so daunting. The storm may still come, but you'll find yourself standing firm, knowing you have the tools to weather it. So here's what I want you to take away from all of this. The next time you face adversity, whether it's a small hiccup in your day or a major life challenge, ask yourself, how can I handle this like a Stoic? How can you respond with clarity and calm, instead of reacting out of anger, frustration, or fear? How can you take this challenge and turn it into an opportunity for growth? Because that's where your true power lies. Not in avoiding adversity, but in how you face it, how you move through it, and how you use it to become stronger. The storm will pass. Life's difficulties will eventually fade. But your strength, your resilience, your ability to stay grounded in the face of adversity, that's what will stay with you. And that's the kind of strength that no one can take away. Let's take a step back for a moment. We've talked about struggle, about self-sabotage, about how we make life harder than it needs to be. We've talked about the way we react to things we can't control, how we hold on to pain longer than necessary, how we let emotions dictate our actions instead of choosing how we want to respond. We've talked about adversity, about facing life's storms without losing ourselves in them, about the strength that comes from learning to stand still when everything else is chaotic. And now, here we are. After all that, the question becomes, what now? What do you actually do with this? Because if we're not careful, all of this remains just another set of ideas, another conversation that feels important in the moment, but fades away as soon as real life pulls us back into its distractions. So let's make this real. Let's make it something you can take with you. Something that doesn't just exist in theory, but in practice, in your actual day-to-day life. Because at the end of the day, that's all that matters. It's not about knowing more. It's about living differently. And the way you start living differently isn't through some grand, dramatic change. It's not about waking up tomorrow and suddenly being a brand new person. It's about the little shifts, the small moments where you start choosing differently. That's where transformation happens. It's in the seconds before you react to something frustrating. It's in the pause you take before letting anger take over. It's in the way you respond when someone disappoints you. It's in the quiet decision to let go of something that no longer serves you. To stop giving energy to things that drain you. To step into a version of yourself that isn't weighed down by unnecessary suffering. Think about what that could look like in your life. Think about the things that currently make you feel stuck. The things that bring you stress or frustration or resentment. Maybe it's work, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's something you've been carrying with you for years. Now ask yourself, what's actually keeping you stuck? Is it the situation itself, or is it your reaction to it? Is it the event, or is it the story you've been telling yourself about it? And if it's the story, if it's the way you've been holding on to it, if it's the expectations you've been clinging to, then that means you have a choice. That means the weight you've been carrying isn't permanent. That means you have the power to put it down. It doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean you can snap your fingers and suddenly feel light and free. But it does mean that you don't have to keep suffering in the same way. It means you can start making small choices right now that shift the way you experience life. You can start practicing awareness of your thoughts, of your reactions, of the patterns that keep pulling you into struggle. You can start asking yourself, is this worth my energy? Before getting caught up in things that don't actually matter. You can start choosing to let go of what isn't in your control and focus instead on what is. Because here's the truth. Peace isn't something you find outside of yourself. It's not something that happens when everything around you is perfect, when people finally act the way you want them to, when life finally starts cooperating with your plans. Peace is something you choose over and over again, in the middle of the mess, in the middle of the uncertainty, in the middle of everything that feels unfair and frustrating and difficult. Peace isn't what happens when life is easy. It's what happens when you stop making it harder. And I get it. This isn't what we've been taught. We've been raised in a culture that tells us to fight, to push, to resist, to control. We've been conditioned to believe that if we're struggling, it means we're doing something wrong. Or worse, that we just need to try harder. But what if the answer isn't in trying harder? What if the answer is in surrendering, not in a way that means giving up, but in a way that means letting go of the fight that never needed to happen in the first place? What if all the energy you've been pouring into resistance, into frustration, into control, could be redirected into something that actually serves you? That's what I want you to take with you. Not just the idea that life doesn't have to be so hard, but the understanding that you are the one who makes it harder or lighter based on how you show up, based on what you focus on, what you hold on to, what you choose to let go of. And I want you to really sit with that. Because if you get this, if you really absorb it, if you start applying it, even in the smallest ways, it will change everything. Not because the world will suddenly become perfect, but because you will stop needing it to be. So here's my challenge for you. Over the next 24 hours, I want you to pay attention to your reactions. Not to judge yourself, not to criticize, but just to notice. When something upsets you, when something frustrates you, when you feel that urge to react, pause. Just for a second. Ask yourself, is this in my control? Ask yourself, does this deserve my peace? And if the answer is no, let it go. Even just once. Even just for a moment. See how it feels. See what shifts. Because once you start to realize how much power you have over your own experience, you'll never see life the same way again. And if this resonated with you, if something in this conversation sparked something inside of you, I want you to take it a step further. Don't just let this be another thing you heard once and forgot about. Make it real. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Talk about it, write about it, practice it. Because the more we bring awareness to these things, the more we remind ourselves of what's actually within our control, the easier it becomes to live in alignment with it. Life is short, too short to spend it fighting battles that don't need to be fought, carrying burdens that don't need to be carried. You deserve more than that. You deserve to move through life with ease, with clarity, with a sense of lightness that comes from knowing that you don't have to hold on to everything. You don't have to grip so tightly. You don't have to control what was never yours to control. You just have to choose, moment by moment, choice by choice, what's actually worth your energy. And when you do that, when you start making those choices with intention, with awareness, with purpose, you'll find that life itself starts to feel different. Not because it changed, but because you did. So that's it. That's the invitation. Pay attention. Choose differently. Let go of what doesn't serve you. And see what happens when you do. Because I promise you, once you start, you'll never want to go back.